What role have friends and spiritual friendship played in your spiritual path?
Well, I think it's been essential to my spiritual path, and to have the constant testing and exploration and encouragement of a close personal friend, like the one who's on the phone tonight, has been very, very important for me.
Likewise.
It's a continued support and affirmation of what it is our lives are about and what we're doing. And being able to have that with another human being, particularly a close one that one can spend a lot of time with, has been extremely important. And I would not simply, in terms of the most important relationships, I'd also like to include my 2 marriages, which have been both extremely important spiritually.
Yeah, that's true. Companionship is important on the path.
Yes.
And I think the thing about friendship is that you have to, I see the last one is, how would you advise young seekers to forge bonds of friendship as close as the 2 of you have had? And the thing is that we just found ourselves together. It took 2 tries for us to decide that we had anything in common. So you take advantage of what companionship you have, and you do things you have to be willing to be who you really are with people. And with some people, that's going to be so harmonious that you have that kind of friendship.
Yes.
And you have to have somebody that knows you well enough and is safe enough, of course, you determine that reasonably fast, I hope, that you can objectify what you're going through and know that you're heard.
Yes, and it's worth dilating on that just a little bit, because there's a great value in friendship, and you use the word objectify, and that's such an important thing to be able to do. The thing about friends is they listen, and sometimes they're real spiritual help, but just listening is important, because what it allows you, the speaker, to do is to objectify what's on your mind and in your heart, and it gives you an opportunity to put that in an objective formulation where you can hear it too.
Yeah, you don't, when it's inside, you feel it. When you offer it to somebody else, you get to see it. And you also get, think about an object placed in front of a mirror, you get to see the other side of it too.
Yes.
You get to see it from another perspective.
To see ourselves as others see us.
Yeah, exactly. So it's important to understand the spiritual value of other people and to be open to the friendship and be willing to let it develop. And as is so often the case, the best relationships, whether they be marital or friends, is that you're more interested in what you can give than what you can get. It's hard to be a real friend with somebody if there's something you need from them.
Yes.
You feel that you need. You know what I mean? If you need companionship, that's one thing. That's kind of normal. But if you need them, if you feel that you must get something from them, or it's not a good relationship, in the sense of, getting the right responses, the right reassurances, it can be a codependent thing.
Right. But as you talk about giving it, it's like the nature of love.
It is.
You get more of it by giving it.
Exactly. And I would say another thing that's really, really important is that when you communicate with people, speak to the best of them.
That's a good point.
To the best person that you can see in them.
And that will bring out the best of you, too.
Bring out the best in both. And that's also, it's more intimate, even though you're not thinking about intimacy, because you're trying to speak to each other like core to core instead of shell to shell. It's not, you have the opportunity to escape from the often all too comfortable, just automatic response. And if you remember, and this is, if you're on a spiritual path, you should be able to remember that there's a divine being in there, trapped in that personality.
Yes,
indeed. Just like you. I mean, trapped just as you are. And unique just as you are. But, yeah.
How does one speak to the best of the other? I'm referring back to the point you made today that when we're speaking to a friend or anybody for that matter, we should try and speak to the best of them. How does one do that?
Well, the thing that prevents it is that any negative emotion, and if you happen to have a negative emotion at the time, you might want to bite your tongue and take a breath, but you certainly don't want to project it on them. And it's really being more concerned, it's assuming the best. It's a kind of assuming the best. And not giving as much reality to the incidental bumps and warts that we may have. I have a story.
Oh, excellent. A story, please.
Yes. One day, I pulled into a parking garage and was trying to find a spot, and there was another car coming down a ramp toward me. And I wasn't sure if he saw me and where I was moving, so I tapped the horn. Then I went a short distance and pulled into a parking place. And that car pulled up behind me as if to block my escape. And this extremely angry man came up to my window. "Why did you honk at me?" He was just furious. And I rolled my window down a little, and he was just going on about how I honked at him. And I said, "Well, I wasn't sure if you saw me." He said, "Yeah, but you shouldn't have honked at me." I mean, he was just totally offended by it. And I rolled the window down a little bit, just a little bit, so not to let his hand come in. And he said, "Why won't you open your window? Why did you stop there?" or something like that. And I looked at him, and I just, for some reason, I just spoke the truth. And I spoke to him as if he were a rational, caring soul. And I said, "I'm afraid of you." I said, "I see murder in your eyes." And he just abruptly stopped. And I started to say something else, and he said, no, don't say anything. And he just stood there for a little while and pulled himself together and took some breaths and said, "Well, all right, but you shouldn't have honked at me." He got in his car and drove away. But it was stunning because my experience of speaking to him was not from a place of fear. I was really speaking to the best part of him. And the transformation was astounding. I wouldn't count on this always working, but I saw it work.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a memorable event in my life.
I have a memorable parking story, too. But it was, well, I'll tell you the story. Several years ago, my wife and my son and her father, who was at that point in his 90s, had visited California, and they were coming back to Indianapolis, and I was picking them up at the airport. So I took the van, and I went up to the airport, and I was a little bit early, and I was driving around the circle in front of the terminal, where, of course, one can't pause or park, and they have guards to make sure that one doesn't do that. And I noticed one of these guards who seemed to be taking his job very seriously, and he was this huge policeman. He was probably 6'6", and he had a bald head and a mustache that went from his chin around his mouth. And he was very active, ordering people around, and I drove around a couple of times. And it just made me annoyed, that kind of, I won't say abuse of power, but small people, big power kind of thing. And I drove around another time, and a woman had stopped and gotten out of her car to do something, and he ran over to her as he was gesturing and was complaining and ordering her back in the car. He may have written her a ticket or something like that. And I was just getting more and more bent out about this guy and what he was doing. And I went around again. And another trip around, I looked inside and I saw the wheelchair, and my wife and my son had just appeared, and they were going over to the luggage carrier. So I went around again, and on this trip, when I got back to the terminal, there was a parking place at one of the end of the cars, and I pulled into the parking place, and I turned off the car, and I went back, and I opened the tailgate, and I turned around, and there's this cop, and he's probably a foot from me, and he's really in my face, and he says to me, "You're the wheelchair, right?" I said, yeah, just stay where you are. And he went up, and some other cop tried to come at me, and he ordered them away. And he went in the terminal and got the wheelchair and my wife and her father and brought them to the car. And I thought, I've wasted all of this energy.
Exactly.
Being upset.
That's right.
And how silly.
And denying both of you.
That's right.
The best of what they were.
That's right. And there's an example, Theta. I hope I learned my lesson on that one.
It's the kind of thing you sometimes need to be reminded about. I mean, one needs to be reminded of.
So, going back to the original question, speaking to the best of them, we have presumptions or negative judgments about the person you're about to approach or about to speak to?
Yes, and I will state that as a spiritual principle. It is necessary in the spiritual life to make the best assumptions, and it is much better to be disappointed than it is to be cynical and right. And I will offer that as a spiritual principle.
Right, and there's another spiritual aspect, and that's to realize that what you take to be the negative thing about the other person is in you. It's your discomfort, and plus your reason for it, your rationalization of, or your justification for it. And the other person may be innocent or may be misbehaving, either way. But the thing you feel about the situation is yours.
That's right.
It's absolutely yours. So, in order to speak to the best of the other person, you must also speak from the best part of yourself. And not that tiny thunderstorm that's running around in your mind. And to realize that the other person isn't responsible for how you feel. And so don't punish them for it.
For how you feel.
Right. If the person is misbehaving, and it's appropriate to say something about the behavior, don't let what you're feeling do the talking for you.
Right.
Because it's one thing to correct somebody simply because it's appropriate. It's another thing to let them, well, in other words, your response should be appropriate for the actual situation, not just a desire to relieve that emotional tension so that you can feel better.
Well said. Yeah, exactly.
And so all of these things go to speaking to and from the best part.
Yes.
You'll get the best result if you try to do that. It may not be what you wanted, and the situation may deteriorate because there are things that don't have anything to do with you that are going to go on anyway. But that would be the case in any event.
That leads me on to asking another question, which seems to be related to this one, is how have the two of you helped each other overcome difficult moments in your personal life and on the path?
Sometimes just being heard.
Yes, it's a matter of being there for one another.
Right. And sometimes Terry can help simply by my knowing that I can call him if I need to. And he doesn't have to exert anything.
And you don't even have to call, really.
That's right.
There's something to that of knowing that somebody is there and cares. And it doesn't need to be actively used all the time.
Right, exactly. And there have been, of course, difficult moments where we have really opened up about a confusing or painful situation.
Yeah, for sure.
But you know that the other one is listening with goodwill, even if you can't actually do anything concrete. And we help each other in practical ways.
Yes.
Need a ride to the airport, whatever. But
know it that being there and being available and being kind of safe harbor. It's like family and home. And God knows that Tarika should be that way. It should be a place you can always go. A place that will not reject you for who you are, but will work with you whatever your problem is.
Right. And even though every fakir or fakira won't be necessarily super available and super attentive, we know that we're often distracted by things or worrying about something, which is complete waste, but we do it anyway. And that's just a case where if somebody is unavailable, you can't take it personally either.
Right. But that's honoring the other person too.
That's right. And sometimes you can have enough of a friend on a temporary basis if both respond to the other's needs out of goodwill. So one need not despair. And I'm the kind of person who's never much felt like I belonged to a group. So this has been difficult for me at times. But just give people a chance to be decent, and they usually are. And I have to recognize that my feeling detached is to a great extent not being open.
Could you dilate on that a little?
Well, if you're a bunch of people and you feel like you don't have anything in common with them, why is that? We have way more in common than we have different.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, you can meet somebody and make a comment about the weather and then try to get to know them from what else they say, how they react, what they bring up. And to realize that another person is a whole exploration. There's a whole world that they live in that isn't yours. And there aren't that many people that are just irredeemably boring. There really aren't. I mean, these days I could find myself trapped with a Trump supporter and try to find a way to have a conversation and really listen to what they have to say to try to understand why this particular toxic phenomenon appeals to them. Because most people who are caught up in, quote, the wrong thing, it isn't because they're perverse.
Right.
So, Cindy, are there any specific times when either of you had to overcome something difficult and found each other companionship to be of great help? Any specific stories?
Well, we talked to each other about...
We've been through a lot.
Sarah came to visit me when I was in jail. Like it says in the Bible, I was in prison and you visited me. And we've both gone through difficult things and shared it. We've had some pretty difficult times personally, but I don't know. There's a point at which a friendship becomes worth caring for. You can care about the other person, but there's this new being that occurs that is the friendship. So whatever degree of friendship you have, it should be valued. You may have to be realistic about it having some limits sometimes, depending on the kind of friendship it is. Everybody is not our most intimate friend, but we have friends. And it's part of honoring the other person, not to demand too much out of them sometimes.
Yes, but it's also in the nature of friendship that you can demand too much. And it may be successful or it may not be successful, but the relationship will continue. You can disappoint each other.
If that is unbalanced to equilibrium, both parties will be willing to restore it.
Yes, that's right.
And honestly, friendship is inherently spiritual if you are spiritual about life.
True.
If you think about the spiritual virtues, if you really practice them, friendship, the lack of friendship would not be a problem.
Can you say more about that?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of the Tarika in this case. If we all took seriously the spiritual virtues, made it a point to understand them, and be vigilant to the things that undermine them, and recognize those things for what they are and for what they're not. Think of traditional hospitality. People who don't know you or barely know you welcome you into their house, serve you tea, and sit down and ask you how you are, and it's not all fake.
No, it's very much a matter of spiritual virtue and of honoring the inherent spirituality or goodness or godness of the other person.
That's right. And the fact that some of it they picked up passively from their traditional environment doesn't lessen its value.
Or, yes, its value for either side.
Right. So, I don't know, is that enough friendship stuff?
It is a lot, and it is very deep and wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So we'll go on to the next question, which is off tangent from the friendship one. What role has food played in your past? Cooking and eating are sacred in many cultures. Do you have your own rituals related to food?
I don't. But you know, we have shared, as people do, for instance, getting into highly spiced foods, comparing the experience there. Terry gave me a gift once of the absolute hottest pepper he could find on the surface of the earth.
Because I knew you were into hot peppers.
That's right, exactly. Yes, I did taste it. I didn't taste much of it. I mean, it was, of course, too hot for me, but I had to find out what the flavor was, because for me, hot is not the end purpose.
No, but you really like hot.
Yeah, I think I don't care as much now, and of course I've never cared that much about food, which is just a weird thing. But Harry enjoys food much more than I do.
Well, I don't know if I can say much about it spiritually.
No, I'm not sure either, other than, you know, it is something that there is something spiritual in a shared experience.
That's right.
And if it's a shared, enjoyable experience, it's even better.
It's more about sharing than it is about eating.
That's right. There's sharing a meal and there's eating. And most of the time, I just eat because I'm pretty solitary. It's not about the food. It's about the shared experience, whatever it is. If both people are really into the food they're eating, then there's more to share.
So there's a letter titled On Our Involvement in the Worldly Matters. And here states in that letter that when you find yourselves overwhelmed or distracted or dispersed or crushed by your life in the world, then it's time to retreat, to get your bearings again, and to remember who you are, to find yourself at peace. So the question is, which place of retreat did you go to back then? And is it still the same place now?
Yes, it is.
For the most part, yes.
Yes, and that retreat is stepping out of the flux.
Exactly. And that's one of the most valuable things about the invocation, about the name.
Yes.
Is that you can repose in it. You can step back into it and observe your worldly troubles from that place, which is not a boat tossed upon the waters. And it doesn't, I would imagine some people learn that right away. But otherwise, it comes with time spent with the name.
I suspect that's something people really don't learn. That you have to have some experience and time with it to get to know and savor that quality.
Well, that's right. And you have to discover the peace in the name before you know it's there to step into.
That's right. And that's part of the getting to know and do the invocation properly.
Right.
So that it gives you that access to that space for yourself, or the divine.
It's a little bit like friendship. If you're trying to get something out of the invocation, it's like a friendship that has an ulterior motive, which can't be a friendship. And it does take some time to get close enough with the name and not always think of it to think of the name in the present rather than as taking yet another perhaps burdensome and perhaps light step along the path. That there is nowhere to go with the name. It's here, it's now, it has all the qualities that we ever would want, being free. And if you treat it like your friend, it will be your friend.
So was there ever a specific place that you retreated to? I know we're talking about invocation as being that place, but was there ever a place that you treated towards and you needed to?
My own space.
You mean a physical location, Theta? No.
You didn't want to go to your own room?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my own house.
Well, I think what I meant was away from your day-to-day space, because these days often retreat is referred to escaping from where you are right now to going somewhere to get something.
When I was a child, I lived across the street from a wooded area, and the woods was the place I went. I went to nature. I found my peace in nature. But as an adult, I don't know. Sometimes you want to go to a park, or sometimes you want to do something. Sometimes you want to get out of the house. Sometimes the space you want is open space. And sometimes it's a closed, protected space.
Yes, and on the one hand, I can think of some great places I've been that have spiritual qualities. And I'm thinking of Mecca, and I'm thinking of Delphi, and I'm thinking of the Black Hills, and things like that. But I also think it's a mistake to think you have to go somewhere and find that. Because there isn't anything you can find there that isn't here.
Yes, there's nothing wrong with going someplace hoping to find something. My trip to the canyon lands of Utah, I was looking for a new and positive experience. I was overwhelmed, though, by the mystery, the spirituality, the sense of the presence of God. And I've been back another time, and it's still there. So there are places, and I would return there again if I had a good opportunity and be refreshed by it.
As a device or a tool, one can go somewhere to get reacquainted or re-in touch with it. And that certainly...
Or more detached from the local problem.
Right, and after all, the very term vacation means an emptying, right? So there's a place for that, and it's useful. But it's here, too, you know.
Even if you go to another place, because the current place seems to reinforce whatever is going on in your mind and heart, the change is good. If you want to change something. We live in intimate relationships with whatever environment we're in. It makes perfect sense. If you're having a negative experience with your partner in your house, go to the other side of the house and get your bearings.
Yes, and in that sense, there's a positive value to going somewhere to change the experience that you're having.
Right. It's better to detach inwardly, but if changing location helps, some people might go to some entertainment in order to feel better. And that's not totally invalid, but if they're just replacing one state with another to get relief from the first.
Yeah, if what they're really after is distraction.
Yeah, because the best place to go would be where you can actually be closer to yourself. But, you know, if you look at a beautiful scene in nature and it expands your heart, then you have more inner space to occupy. And so you're already less claustrophobic about whatever it is you're living with inside. Is that enough on that?
I like that.
Yes, it is. It's a good answer. All right, so the next one is, again, referring back to a question that perhaps was asked.
Let me interrupt. We failed to mention the Zalia, which I have retreated to many times in my life. Let's not forget that. That's
so
real
when
and valuable.
You said the Zalia, where was the Zalia at the time?
Wherever it was in my house.
Right. You mean you had a personal Zalia in the house where you retreated to from time to time?
Yeah, exactly.
And since we entered the tree, I think we've always had a Zalia room. And that's been important.
So, yeah, exactly. It's easy to overlook because we've lived with it so long. And we just think, oh, well, that's just part of our house. But it is a place to go.
So there was a mention about natural disasters. And you speak of natural disaster as being a trial or a test. And how mysteriously it is included in our own experiences. So the question is, did you ever experience a natural disaster? And if so, what was it and what effect did it have on you?
No big one. I mean, I had a tornado go through my neighborhood and the power was off for days and I had some damage. So I was without one particular valuable utility, electricity. Fortunately, it wasn't in the depths of winter.
Yes, and I've been through blizzards and been without power for days, but that's not the kind of immediate threatening. Theta, I gave a muzakara on this.
You did? Maybe that's where the text is coming from. So in the text, it refers to, for example, the hurricane or the floods, etc., that happen in other countries. And I think in that text, you refer to it as being somehow, those disasters being somehow included in our own experience. So I wanted to know if there was any particular natural disaster you ever experienced, and if that had an effect.
No, I have not had the experience of being in an imminent, life-threatening natural disaster.
Right. The kind of thing that really pulls the rug out from under you, basically, like an earthquake. But no, I mean, I've had emotional disasters.
We all have had them.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And a natural disaster is not entirely unlike that.
Have you heard that muzakara on the meaning of natural disaster? I was speaking to Theta Zainab. Have you heard that muzakara?
I don't know if it's a muzakara, but I've certainly read the response to a letter someone wrote to you.
You might listen to the muzakara. I should refresh my memory of that. That was one of my early muzakaras. That was right after the tsunami in Phuket, when it was very much a part of, I guess, everybody's thinking. It was major news at the time. But I'm going to listen to that again. But you might do the same, Theta. Maybe that will help answer your question.
There is something about the disruption that a natural disaster has on your external world, and the kinds of disruptions that can occur interiorly. You can really be left feeling completely lost and helpless, even though all your power is on.
Yes, I think I was focusing more on this notion of suddenly all of the values are different.
It's a change in perspective, a shift in perspective.
Right. If we saw ourselves as we truly are all at once, that would be comparable to a tsunami or a giant earthquake.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
All right.
But listen to the muzakara and see if you think that helps answer your question.
I will. I've made a note of that. Before I continue, I wanted to ask, how are we doing in the time? Are we still good to continue?
I'm good to continue if we're still in the zone.
I don't feel like I've fallen out of the zone. Not sure if I knew I was in it, but I guess it's all right. The next thing is on aesthetics and decoration.
So let me offer some background on this. So again,
please do.
Going to specifics on sacred art. So the question really is, do you recall seeing a beautiful architecture or being at a certain place that had a significant impact on your soul or had a change in your perspective?
You're speaking of man-made items.
Right, man-made items, or even nature. Even nature.
Like my Utah thing, the canyons and Arches National Park and all that kind of stuff. And for that matter, I have been truly impressed while driving through the Rockies. And the desert impressed me.
A lot of people say that about the desert.
As far as architecture, I would say that it was really only after I entered the Kurika, I think, that I was able to really experience something like the majesty of a cathedral, especially at this time. And certainly, there's some pretty nice mosques, too.
Yes, there have been some beautiful buildings I've seen in a variety of different cultures, but none of them produce the effect on me that some natural things do. And for me, the number one has always been the night sky.
And why is that? What does that symbolize for you?
Symbolizing is not the correct term, but it's clear the beauty and majesty and wonder of God and creation.
And it's infinity.
Yes, and it's beautiful.
And it embodies the unknown. It's not a body, but it embodies what is unembodied.
And I also remember being knocked off my feet by the view from the temple at Delphi in Greece, which I did not expect and was just suddenly overwhelmed. And I don't remember the temple at all. But the view from that mountaintop down to the Mediterranean, I was just thunderstruck. How are we doing?
We're doing good. I could go on.
Well, there's only a couple of more questions, and I can stay till 9.
All right. So the next one is, in the early days when you considered yourself as a perennialist, or if you ever did you start off with the idea of opposing modernism because at that time that was the way perennialists defined themselves? And if you did, when did you have the shift in perspective from that of being in opposition to modernism to that of acceptance?
What an excellent question.
That really is a good question.
That really is an excellent question.
Thank you.
Oh, was that your question?
It was.
That really is an excellent question. Well, I think we've described the fact that we were all always universalists at heart. And perennialism is a wonderful explication of universalism, or maybe it's the other way around. But
I would say we recognized ourselves as perennialists rather than
that's probably it.
We discovered that we were perennialists when we came to America.
Yes, all right, that's accurate. And then one of the things that was presented to us was this anti-modern perspective. And it was easy to acquire and take on as our own because what it did was it opened up and explicated the wisdom of tradition. The opposition between tradition and modernity was unnecessary and finally hypocritical. But the initial point and interest was that traditional things have a lot of wisdom in them, and that wisdom can be found and understood and is expressed across cultures and across time in terms of its sacred beauty and access.
Well, tradition is inherently connected to the past.
Yes, that's right.
And modernism serves a valuable point of reference for a continued disillusionment with the world, with its false promises.
Yes, and with its false sense of the absoluteness of materiality.
Yes, and modern society more and more and more is materialist.
Right.
So the idea of seeing a deficiency in where we are now rather than where we might have been in the past, there's truth to it. But one is never disconnected from what's real.
Right. Never. And often...
And not only that, the real problem was the opposed part, the opposition to it.
Just about the same.
Yes, to actually find yourself living within an enemy. That's not helpful.
And there's something more, which is that often the traditionalists see their role in the world as being to critique modernism and culture. And that simply feeds the ego, in my experience.
Well, we've certainly seen it do that.
We've certainly
seen it do that in myself.
Yes, and you often find people using the term "it's traditional" to defend something, which is insufficient.
Right. It's not meaningless. It's a point of reference, but it's not...
All right, fair enough.
There's a difference between traditional and sacred.
Yes, well said.
Sacred is more likely to be in the traditional, but not always.
That's right. And one can't be absolute about these things on grounds of speaking for God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the idea of being opposed to modernism. It was another way to feel special.
Yes,
it was
that's
another
right.
way that the form that Tariqa took in those days encouraged a kind of pride.
Yes, that's right.
Really opposed to spirituality. And it made the same thing as dismissing another human being for being among the profane people.
That's right.
That was just a disastrous attitude.
I agree.
We were talking about the importance of friendship and being the best in people and everything like that. And what could be more opposed than that us and them mentality?
So at what point did your perspective change about how to look at modernism and no longer be in opposition to that? What was the sort of the turning point?
Well, let's be clear here. I'm not sure we're really modernists in that sense.
No, not at all.
but recognizing this false opposition and not recognizing the value that some modern things have, or even modern formulation of the sacred and sacred reality and method, much of which, although traditional as honest and legitimately sacred, has not come to us because the culture is so different and the language is no longer successful in describing it.
Not completely devalued.
No, particularly not.
But it doesn't have the same everyday relevance living in this world, which is obviously quite distorted from past times.
Yes.
And beware of any ism. One does not have to see technological progress as an inherent good, and what is better necessarily lies in the future, which is kind of what modernism is. In my personal case, I grappled with it a lot because I worked with technology, and I was able to see all the things it could do, and at the same time, because I was so close to it, I could also see what it really was, and I could see the harms that was enabling in society, and then go to work and enjoy my work. And I had contrast that I lived with for years, and I think that really helped, because there's the last word in that question is acceptance. It's not like it's opposable by any human being. So one has to make one's peace with it.
And besides, it's the world God has placed us in. We can say, oh, if only I'd lived in the Renaissance, but we don't.
We don't, and that's total lack of gratitude. So the life
right.
we've been given, we might not have been given one.
And we need to not only accept it, but in many ways celebrate it, because here we are, and this is what we know, and this is what we do.
Yes, and this is the environment in which we are to discover truth.
That's right. This is the lessons that we have been given in this perfect playground to learn it in.
Yeah.
And there really isn't any other way to look at it.
Exactly. It's in experience that we discover truth. And the particular variations that can happen in that experience do not change the nature of experience. The fact that we experience the modern technological world does not prevent us from milking experience for its spiritual value.
It may even prompt us to recur to their spiritual value.
That's right. That's right. And you mentioned, Terry, certain things being more, certain spiritual things being more available in some modern formulation. Nothing quite like quantum physics and cosmology, modern cosmology and physics, that I think have entered our language and become points of entry to the inward, the mysterious, and the infinite.
Well said.
So there are good things that appear in the modern world that we didn't have before. I think the bad outweighs the good, but that doesn't mean that nothing good is denied me because of it.
Yes.